Hello and welcome to Equine Science Talk International. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about laterality and balance. That's both the balance of the rider in relation to the horse and the horse's own laterality. That's to say the way its brain processes information differently according to which side it receives the information from. This video is adapted from the presentation for the Centered Riding Symposium 2024 titled Centered Rider, Centered Horse. First of all, let's look at why we need to be centered. What does that mean that we're putting ourselves in the middle? Why is that important? Well, the horse follows the center of gravity. So when we're centered ourselves, we bring the horse into better balance. That happens automatically. Being balanced ourselves makes it easier for the horse to carry our weight. It's safer because we can respond better to the movement of the horse. And being balanced helps minimize the risk of injury to ourselves or to our horses. Being balanced also helps the horse to move more naturally and in a freer and more harmonious way. And balance, as we all know, is absolutely at the center of centered riding. So is it possible to be perfectly centered? We would like to think it is, but is it actually possible? Well, we're not perfectly symmetrical and neither is the horse. Most of us are right-handed or left-handed, very few people are ambidextrous, and everybody has some asymmetries. You might have one leg a little bit longer than the other, one foot a little bit bigger, one eyebrow's a little bit higher, one ear's a little bit higher, one arm's a little bit longer, this sort of thing. And while centered riding can't change these things, it can help us to be in better balance. So what about the horse? Well, the horse isn't naturally straight either. And there are three aspects to the crookedness. The first one is the natural bodily crookedness. That's inborn and we can't really change it. And then there are two further aspects, the motor laterality, which is the preference for the limbs on one side of the body, and that's roughly equivalent to human-handedness. It's not quite the same because we are much more strongly lateralized. We write with our right hands, or left hand if we're left-handed. We tend to do everything with our preferred side. The horse is a little more balanced than that, but the principle is the same. And then there is the sensory laterality, and that's the preference for the eyes, ears, and nostrils on one side of the body. Bodily crookedness is physiological and fixed. Laterality is steered by the brain, and that changes under different circumstances and according to the way the horse feels about things. The thing that's most commonly confused with laterality is the bodily or longitudinal crookedness. And most horses have a curve in one to one side or the other, and this is what we tend to think of as being the crookedness. It might be to the right, it might be to the left, and some horses have a sort of a wiggly S shape. Sometimes this is attributed to the fact that the horse's organs aren't symmetrically placed in its body, so the heart's on the left, the cecum's on the right, etc. And the horse may also have other conformational asymmetries. It may have had illnesses or injuries that have affected its conformation, and while these might be moderated a little bit by veterinary intervention or by physiotherapy, they're basically fixed and mechanical. The bodily crookedness isn't actually very easy to measure. It can be measured very accurately under lab conditions, but this is quite complicated to do. However, the hindquarters displacement can give us a pretty reasonable and consistent idea of which direction the horse is bent in. And you can see on the picture here of the lovely Annie that while I stood right behind her and photographed through in between her back legs, her right fore is very slightly displaced towards the center. So that means she's slightly bent to the right. And I did this several times and it was the same every time, and this has been shown in scientific studies to be a reasonably consistent measure. And it's a much better way than trying to feel it while you're riding. Studies have shown that when you correlate what the rider says the crookedness is and what the lab equipment says the crookedness is, they don't really correlate. So why is this? Why can't we feel it? Well, first of all, the rider might be crooked. And this is something we're very familiar with in centered riding. If the rider is crooked, so is the horse. And you can see an example here of a girl on a very pretty Palomino horse.
And you can see she probably thinks she's sitting absolutely straight, but her head is tipped a little bit to the right, and her feet aren't quite level, and her shoulders aren't quite level. And if you look carefully at the horse's back legs, you can see it's actually positioned itself to maneuver itself under her centre of gravity. So even though she's reasonably straight, she's not quite straight, and the horse has compensated for that. So when the rider says they feel the crookedness, they're probably either feeling their own crookedness, or they might be feeling this motor and or sensory laterality of the horse. The horse's brain, as in all vertebrates, is divided into two hemispheres, and they have different specializations. So the right hemisphere of the horse, so that corresponds to the left side of the body, is responsible for retreat behavior, reactive and instinctive behavior, the assessment of new situations and potentially threatening situations, and reactions to physical or psychological stress. The left hemisphere, that's the right side of the horse, deals with approach behavior, responsive, so that's considered behavior, assessing familiar situations, focused considered behavior, and learning. And each of these specializations on each side are reflected in the horse's preference for one side of the body or the other. These preferences are called the horse's laterality, and they're not directly related to its physical asymmetries. And the laterality itself is divided into two aspects, that's motor and sensory. So let's start with looking a bit more closely at the motor laterality. And this is the preference for the limbs on one side of the body, and it's roughly comparable to human-handedness. It can be expressed as the direction in which the horse seems to be a bit better coordinated, it seems to learn more easily, it possibly bends more easily. It can be the foot that's preferentially advanced when the horse is eating from the ground or grazing. And it can be the foreleg that moves first when the horse moves off from halt. We also have the sensory laterality, and that can be expressed as the side preferred for social interaction between horses, and there's a slight preference for left-left interactions. The side preferred for investigating novel objects and situations, and that depends on how the horse interprets whatever the object is. If it thinks it's a little bit dangerous, then it's more likely to put it on the left. The preferred side for interactions with people, and generally speaking, there's also a preference there to have people on the left. And it's also a side preferred by and in relation to foals. There it's a little bit variable according to the situation. Now, both the sensory and the motory laterality are variable, and they change according to certain factors. And the first and probably most important one is the horse's stress and emotional level. It can also vary according to the horse's state of mind, and it can vary according to changes in the horse's environment or routine. So there's a whole variety of things that can affect the sensory and motor laterality. In very, very general terms, stress usually shifts both the sensory and the motor laterality to the left, but in a small percentage of horses it moves to the right. There are very few of those horses, but there are some where the whole process is sort of back to front. Generally speaking, optimistic horses may be more right-sided, and that applies particularly to the first foot they start with when they set off to move. If they set off with the right foot first, they're more likely to have an optimistic outlook. Relaxation reduces the strength of the laterality, especially the sensory laterality. So laterality can be a very important indicator of welfare and of the horse's current state of mind. And when the mind is out of balance, because of the laterality, the whole body of the horse will be out of balance too. Now, a very important study was done a few years ago on warm blood horses in Germany. They were 2- and 3-year-old horses, and they were studied while they were out on their young horse pasture, out 24 hours a day, having fun being with each other. And then they were brought into the stables where they were in individual stabling, and they started their initial training. And they were studied before, when they first came into the boxes, and when they started their training. And they came up with some very interesting results. First of all, if we have a look here at the stress hormones and what was happening at the time, we can see that there was a peak when the horses were brought into the boxes. That then went down over the following couple of weeks, and then it went up again as the training started. Then it levelled out and came down again. So let's compare this with the motor laterality measurements. And here the axis is slightly different. On the stress hormones, high shows high level of stress hormones. On the laterality, it shows the index. And 1 represents right laterality and -1 represents left laterality. So if we look at the average line in the middle, so this is the average of all the horses tested, we can see that it started off pretty equal. And when they were brought into the boxes, it immediately went down for some of the horses, and by the end of the first week, it had got moved to the left for almost all of them. And then it sort of levelled out again. If we look at the sensory laterality, again, if we look at the average levels here, the red line, you can see that when they were brought into the boxes, it shifted very strongly immediately to the left. It then went back up a little bit, as they got used to the boxes, and then it balanced out again. So in each case, particularly the change in housing shifted both the sensory and the motor laterality to the left. So what does this mean for us as riders? Well, it means the crookedness that we feel on the horse when we're riding can be situation dependent, and being aware of this can help us to respond appropriately. The horse that was straight at home when you were practicing might become crooked when you go to the show, because its sensory laterality is going to kick in. It will be under stress, however used to the situation it is. There will be noises, there will be strange horses, there's a completely different atmosphere, the rider will be stressed. There is quite likely to be a shift usually to the left. So it is very common to find that the horse that was going beautifully straight at home suddenly isn't straight when you get into a strange environment. It's very important to realise that this is due to a stress on the horse. You need to reduce the stress and not discourage or punish the expression of the stress. I can't stress that enough, because that is absolutely fundamental. There is no point in trying to force your horse to be straight. Even if you don't think of it like that, you're not consciously punishing it, but you're trying to push it into a straight form. That's actually going to make things worse. So it's important to think about the relaxation at that point, and we'll come a little bit later on as to how you can do that. Being sensitive to these changes in laterality can therefore help promote a more harmonious and sympathetic relationship with the horse. It can also give us clues to the general welfare, as we saw when the horses were brought in from the field to the more confined surroundings. There was a shift to the left then. Motor laterality is very often measured by the advanced foot when grazing, and it's important to know this so that you know what your normal is, so then you can work out when it's changing. Living under natural conditions, horses are roughly evenly split left and right-sided. It's roughly 45% right, 45% left, and 10% with no difference. So this is quite an important measure, and it's a good idea to be aware of which side your horse prefers. This is very easy to assess. We're going to have a little look at Annie here out at grass, and you can see how she moves around while she's grazing and puts one foot forward, then she moves a little bit forward again, and the other foot is in forward. And if you make a note of this, you actually go out and watch your horse grazing and take a notebook with you. It's actually very easy to work out which side is preferred. And the way you do that is you make at least 4 blocks of at least 10 observations a day over at least 3 days. And you take the observation every 30 seconds, noting left, right or centre. Centre is if one hoof isn't more than a hoof's length in front of the other one. And from that you can calculate a laterality index by taking the right minus the left divided by the left plus right plus centre, the total number of observations. And that will give you a value between 1 and -1. If it's more in the minus direction, then it's a left laterality. If it's more in the plus direction, it's a right laterality. And when you're comparing values, you want to make sure that the other factors on that day are similar. So if you want to say, right, okay, we've moved the horses to a different field, Try to do it on a day where the weather conditions are similar, with the same members of the group are present, that sort of thing, so that you really are looking at the effect of the change of the field and not something else. So can you feel these changes while you're riding? What does it mean for the rider? Well, as motor laterality usually changes more slowly, or for many horses it changes more slowly than sensory laterality, you might notice the horse becoming a little harder or easier to bend on one side. You might find your seat is being pushed a little one way or the other. Lateral movements might become a little bit easier or more difficult in one direction or the other as the laterality changes. So if you notice that your horse is becoming increasingly one-sided, it could be a sign of more general stress and not be necessarily anything to do with your riding. Okay, let's have a look now at sensory laterality in a bit more detail. As I mentioned, it's been scientifically shown that horses tend to prefer the left side for anything that they're concerned about, and that stress will shift the laterality to the left. Now, we actually see this in all sorts of everyday situations, but most of the time we don't even notice that it's going on. But once you know about it, you can't miss it, and you'll see it every time. And I've got a few examples to show you here. The first one is Hippie, who's a little Shetland pony, and as you can see, when I'm on his left, he leads up really very nicely. He trots along, no problem at all, absolutely fine. When we turn round and come the other way, it's a very different story. Now I'm in his right eye, and he's not happy at all. He's pulling away, he's running to the side, he's trying to overtake me, he's pulling away again, and when we stop, he switches immediately back to put me in his left eye. Now, I'm not going to confront that straight away, I'm just going to give him a second. You can see he's switching eyes there, left, right, left, right. What kind of situation am I in here? Maybe it's not all that bad, but he still doesn't really want to let me onto the right. And I have to work a little bit and say, no, I really would quite like to get around onto your right-hand side. And eventually I can get there. But he's not terribly happy about it. So he's really very strongly lateralized. Now, here's another example. This is Fly. She's an older, retired, in fact, riding horse. She's rather sensitive and rather reactive. And she's here with her carer, Constanza. And as you can see, when Constanza's on her left side, everything is fine. She leads very nicely. She's very calm. She's possibly a little bit too close to the handler. It would be nice if she left a little bit more space, but it's certainly nothing serious. She's calm and relaxed. It's fine. Now they're going to change sides, and you'll see that there's a little bit of a difference on this side, but it's nothing like as strong as it was with Hippie. Now, she didn't want to move off. She was a little bit unwilling to move off there on the right side. And when they get down to the end here, they're going to turn around and come back. And she's just pushing very, very slightly there. And now she goes behind Constanza. So she's not being aggressive about it, but she would just kind of rather be on the left, and she's going to insist on it. So she actually switches round behind and then shows up again on the left. So this is actually very, very typical. You often see horses like this. And it's not bad. They're expressing what is actually a fundamental tendency to prefer people on the left. But it's something that you can work on and try to level out those sides, because the more you level out this balance in the brain, the more the body's going to level out. As I said before, the laterality steers the body. So if you can help balance the brain, you're going to help balance the body. So this raises an interesting question. Does it mean that if the horse wants us on the left and doesn't want us on the right, that it's afraid of us? Well, not necessarily, because the left is also the side preferred for social interaction. It's been shown that horses react more quickly and more strongly to something on the left. It doesn't necessarily mean that that thing is the thing that they're afraid of. It's the thing that they want to respond quickly to. And that might be another horse, it might be a person. I'm now going to show you one more video, and this is in a round pen. And this is with Annie, who we saw earlier. She is a Prior Mountain Mustang, so she has a wild horse background. She hasn't really been trained very much, but she's very quiet. She's a lovely personality. She's really sweet, but she's a little bit of a suppressor of emotion. So when anything happens, Annie's the one that sort of freezes up. She doesn't really do anything. So in the round pen, she behaves in a very interesting way to lead. She's almost perfect on both sides. There's almost no difference. However, when we're in the round pen, you can see she's going here to the right. And as she turns to come towards me, I just give her a soft posture. She comes in and she switches over to put me on the left. No, she says, you belong on the left. Nope, yeah, I want you on the left. Yes, I'm very happy to talk to you, but only on the left. As I go up to her and try to change sides, she's moving away from me. And again, I have to work to get onto the right side. She's not aggressive about it, but she's very clearly showing that she prefers having me on the left. So that's an indication that she's not really leveled out in her brain. And as I say, she tends to be the more internalizing type. Now, here is a great example. Unfortunately, I haven't got the video because it's on YouTube and I can't take it off that because I can't find the person it belongs to, unfortunately. So I've taken some screenshots because this is a beautiful example of the left eye effect. Here we have a couple of police horses and they're approaching a pedestrian crossing that's been painted in rainbow colours for Pride Week. And as you can see, they look at this and they think, oh my goodness, what on earth is that? They're rocking their weight back. They're not at all sure about this, even though police horses are trained very thoroughly to deal with all sorts of situations. They're finding this a bit of a challenge. Now, they start to move forward, and as you can see, the rider on the bay horse is trying to keep the horse straight, and it starts to go backwards. The rider on the chestnut is allowing the horse to put the crossing in its left eye and skew itself round to the left. And that horse is moving forwards. At the same time, you can see the rider on the chestnut is now sitting in a hole. The left side of the horse has disappeared because it is so keen to get itself round to have that in its left eye. The next shot, we have the horse, the chestnut is actually going past as long as it's allowed to keep the crossing on its left. The bay horse is still backing up. And on this one, the chestnut has gone past, and now you can see its tail is quite relaxed. It's actually saying, okay, this wasn't quite as bad as I thought it was going to be. The bay has gone onto the crossing, but is very, very tense. Now this rider is sitting in the hole on the left, and the horse is sort of skittering across, tipping its head down to keep the crossing in its left eye. It carries on across. It does put all its feet on the crossing, which on one side is good, but it's still very stressed, while the chestnut is now, yeah, whatever, it's got over that one. As they go on past it, the two horses relax very quickly.
Now, if you remember the diagram we were looking at earlier of the two sides of the horse's brain, you might remember that the right hemisphere, the left side of the horse, is responsible for instinctive behaviour, retreat behaviour, spontaneous reaction, whereas the left hemisphere, the right side of the horse, deals with more considered behaviour, approach and more considered behaviour. So when we come into a situation where the horse absolutely wants to use its left eye, it's in instinct mode. It can't really think logically about this. It's considering whether it needs to flee, and for that it's relying on its instincts more than it's relying on its experience. So regardless of what training it's had and what it's learnt in the past, in the crucial moment, the instinct is going to win. And that's what we're seeing when the horse really wants to put something on the left. Until that instinctive side has decided this thing isn't going to eat me, it's not really that dangerous, it's not going to be able to put it into the considering, thinking side of its brain.
So when you get your horse that spooks at something, you are well advised to allow it to look at that thing with whichever eye it prefers. Usually it's going to be the left. Sometimes it's the right, more usually the left. And don't force it to look at it with the right eye until it's actually ready to. A situation where we often see the stress building up really, really quickly is if, for example, you take your horse to a show or a course and it's suddenly in a strange environment. And it will suddenly want you on the left-hand side, quite possibly won't allow you onto the right. You don't need to fight that situation. Use that because the horse is telling you it's stressed. Lead it around from the left first, and then switch over and see if you can lead it on the right. And keep switching until the horse accepts you on the right and it starts to come down. Because you will realise that when the horse is starting to relax, it will start to be okay with you on the right. I wouldn't get on a horse until I can lead it on both sides, and both sides are not 100% equal, but more or less equal, until the right side is not reacting strongly to the fact that I'm on the right side. It might have a slight preference for me on the left, but it's okay with me on the right. You can use this in these situations. You can always lead your horse around. You don't need any space for that. You can just walk backwards and forwards and practice on both sides, and don't get on until it's come down and it's relaxed on both sides. So what can we draw from all of this? What's the central message? Well, first of all, we can't balance the body unless we balance the mind. Stress puts the mind and therefore the body out of balance, and we can't do anything about that, and neither can the horse. This is the way the horse is made. This is the way its brain processes things. So to deal with stress, we need to create a training environment that's as stress-free as possible. And that starts on the ground. That starts before you get on, with the horse's very first experiences. And in fact, not even when you start training the horse, when you first start handling a foal, make sure that you can use both sides. It's probably going to want you on the left to start with, but just go over and scratch the other side of its neck. Just begin to introduce this idea that you can be on both sides and nothing's going to happen. If the mind isn't balanced before the rider gets on, it is not going to be balanced when the rider is on. You're setting yourself up for a fight. So successful training comes from a place of attentive relaxation. If the horse is in instinct mode, it's going to be reactive, and it can't learn and it can't produce behavior patterns for the future. So this is very, very important. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you find it helpful. Thank you for your attention. If you'd like to find out a bit more about this, for the German speakers, there's a book in German exactly on this called Laterality by Pferden. And there's also some more information on my website at thinkinghorse.org. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it.